So the question is, how do you protect your flock from highly pathogenic avian influenza? Hi, my name is Yannick from Just One More Story Farm, and today I'm going to be sharing with you what we're doing to protect our flock of Buff Orpington chickens. It is currently June of 2022, and we've had one case of highly pathogenic avian influenza in Massachusetts. I am happy to see that the cases of avian influenza have decreased this month and last month, so that's really encouraging. I do routinely check to see updates on cases of highly pathogenic avian influenza through the USDA website, just to make sure that there's no outbreaks near me. I'll leave the link for the USDA website below that lists by state the confirmed cases of HPAI, which is highly pathogenic avian influenza. So according to the USDA, there are 36 affected states in the United States currently, and just this year 40.09 million birds have been affected by avian influenza. Currently this month we're at 2.17 million birds that were affected, as opposed to March, where there was 20.9 million birds affected. So it's a significant decrease, which is really encouraging. But that's still 2 million birds that succumb to avian influenza. So I definitely don't want to let my guard down when it comes to my biosecurity with protection against avian influenza. So I recently had a Massachusetts poultry inspector come to my farm to inspect the farm and to do blood work on my poultry to be sure that everybody is disease-free, and just to be sure that my biosecurity on this farm is where it needs to be at this point. Happily, their blood work all came back negative, so they tested negative for pylorium, typhoid, salmonella, as well as avian influenza. So no signs of those diseases on their blood work. So I was really happy and relieved to get those results. During the farm inspection, I took the poultry inspector around and showed her the things that I was doing to protect my flock. And those things include changing my boots before I enter the poultry yards. Highly pathogenic avian influenza is a virus that can be deadly in poultry. It's transmitted through direct contact with infected poultry or surfaces that are contaminated with the virus. So by changing my boots, I'm taking the precaution that in my backyard there could be droppings from fowl that could be flying overhead. I do have a pond on my property that I have seen ducks that have landed in my pond. My St. Bernard thankfully will chase them off right away, but there's still a risk that there could be wildfowl droppings in my yard that I'm walking through. So when I get to the poultry yard, that's when I have a Tupperware bin that I keep my poultry boots in, and I can just easily quickly switch them out before I step into the poultry yard. I used to always free range my birds and let them have access to the entire backyard, but with the increasing numbers of highly pathogenic avian influenza, I did restrict them from free ranging. They were restricted to a run attached to their chicken coop that I had netting over. However, I did notice that there was more bullying going on. They were not happy about being restricted from free ranging. So I started on an expansion project to give them a larger area to enjoy so that they could spread out a bit more and not feel so confined. My biggest concern was keeping birds out of my poultry area. So I did install a heavy-duty net along the entire chicken run and this expanded run, just to be sure that it's completely covered with netting so they won't have direct contact with birds. I also have a Treadle Feeder. A Treadle Feeder is a poultry feeder where I can put 25 pounds of feed into it and it'll slow feed out the bottom. But in order for the chickens to access that feed, they have to step on a weighted pedal. So the weight of the chicken will press the pedal down and that will open up the lid so that they can access the food. So this is primarily to keep rodents from accessing their food. And I did notice that once I trained them to the Treadle Feeder, any rodents I was seeing just completely moved on because they no longer had access to feed. The other types of feeders that I was using that were open, the chickens were dropping feed all over the ground, and that feed was accessible to rodents, and that's not ideal because rodents can carry many diseases, but specifically when it comes to avian influenza, if rodents step in any droppings contaminated by avian influenza from wild birds out in the yard, then they can certainly track that virus into your chicken coop when they're coming and going. So you want to control the rodent population in the best way that you can. And for me, that's with a Treadle Feeder. If you have any openings in your chicken coop that rodents can get in and out, you want to secure those and cover up any small holes that they can get through to keep them out of your poultry's food and water as well. Keeping it inside of your chicken coop that is completely covered will also help to protect wild bird droppings from dropping into the feed and water sources as well, so that can help. I do like to give my chickens snacks. I love giving them snacks every day. So I just make sure with the snacks that I'm giving them that they are eating every bit of it, and I take away any containers or plates that had the food on there and just be sure that there's no remnants left over of anything they didn't eat, which is not usually an issue. They're usually perfectly content to eat every little bit that I offer them. But you will get the occasional snack that they don't like, so you just got to make sure that you clean that up right away because you don't want to attract any rodents. You also want to make sure your feed storage is a completely closed system so that you are putting your bags of feed. I like to use the big steel cans with the lid on it inside of my feed shed, and that way it's rodent proof, weatherproof, free from any wild bird poultry droppings as well, so just covering a bunch of bases there. I also have designated tools that I use just in the poultry house. My shovels and rakes, I actually keep them in the chicken shed in the corner so that way they're not getting contaminated out in the yard or elsewhere on the property, and I can use them when I need them. If you store your tools elsewhere, you'll just want to disinfect them before bringing them into your poultry yard and using them. So we talked about wearing specific boots when you go into your poultry yard. That also applies to if you have visitors or other members of your family going in and out of the poultry run. You just want to make sure that everyone's aware that they can't be tracking in anything on their boots. So whether you want to have designated boots for each member of the family, so my kids have their own specific set of boots for the poultry yard, or you could do a boot bath where you can wear the same boots but you have to wash them and disinfect them before you step into the poultry yard. So that's an option as well. They also sell bio booties that you can slip over your boots before stepping into the poultry yard. So that's something you could consider for visitors who come to the farm, slipping on some bio booties or disinfecting their boots before they step in there. Now you certainly don't want just anybody walking into your poultry area. Having private property signs or biosecurity signs can help with that. I do have a privacy fence around my entire backyard. The backyard gates do have locks on them to prevent people from just coming into the backyard, as well as private property signs, so that can help to avoid any unsupervised traffic from coming through and potentially bringing in anything on their boots. You definitely don't want to wear your shoes that you wear on your farm to any other farms. So you're going to want to have designated boots that you use on your farm that do not leave the farm. So make sure that everybody living on the farm has their own farm boots that they wear specifically for your farm. You definitely don't want to be going to other farms with anything from your farm that could potentially contaminate their farm, and vice versa. So it's just good practice. You also want to make sure that you're keeping your flock healthy. So making sure that you're cleaning up their feces and keeping their water clean, their feed containers clean, doing routine checks to make sure they're not dealing with any parasites. This time of year in June, we have a lot of flies here in Massachusetts, so hanging up fly bags to catch as many flies in the poultry area as possible is another way to help keep your flock's area clean. Disinfecting your coop when you do a full clean out. You'll want to use a disinfectant to go through and really clean it out and disinfect it so that it's as clean as you possibly can get it. You want to keep any weeds growing. Lots of birds, then you should consider getting more than one. But use it to a shorter height. You don't want rodents being able to hide in those weeds. The chickens in their original run, the chickens just completely ate everything in sight, so it's just barren at this point. And now that they have this new expanded area, they are going to town eating the weeds, and I don't think it'll be long before this is looking pretty barren. I'm hoping that the pallet salad bar will hopefully keep some green going in this area for a bit. Okay, so I'm taking all these measures, but the poultry inspector did have some advice for me on another way that I can keep my flock safe. Her concern with avian influenza coming from the droppings of infected poultry is that poultry flying overhead with this net here, the droppings still can come right on through here, so they are still exposed to poultry droppings. So that is a concern that I would like to address. I just haven't figured out how to go about that. Her recommendation was potentially to try to do some sort of plastic covered high tunnel. I do have a tarp over a section of the original run, but there are still exposed areas over there. This area is just all net. So I am looking into ideas. I just don't know of anything that's big enough to completely cover this area. We do have some pretty heavy rains in Massachusetts, so any sort of tarp or plastic needs to be supported really well, otherwise it's going to cave in. I have not had success with my plastic tunnel greenhouse here in Massachusetts because of the rain and the heavy rains and the heavy snow just completely collapsed it. So I don't think that would work well in this area, but I am open to suggestions. I'm doing research and I'm trying to figure out what I can do. So in the comments below, if you have any suggestions, anything that you're doing that works, I would truly appreciate you leaving those below. And hopefully, as a community, we can help each other out to protect our flocks. My birds are much happier having this extra space. As soon as I cut that opening in there and I crawled on through, you can tell I'm their mother hen because they just followed me right on through. The only ones that didn't follow me through were my two broody hens, because they are very busy right now sitting on eggs, and they're not leaving those eggs. Not to come explore right now, not for mama's calls. Not happening. They are very intent on their job of hatching chicks, and we should have some chicks hatching in the next day or two. So I can't wait to meet the newest additions. Which reminds me, another avian influenza tip is to not bring in poultry from outside sources. So you want to have a closed flock, at least for the time being, while we're dealing with highly pathogenic avian influenza, so I have a closed flock. I have 2 amazing roosters, so I'm able to get fertile hatching eggs from my flock. I have an incubator that I can hatch. I got 2 broody mamas that are working hard to hatch some eggs, so I am able to maintain a closed flock, which is really helpful. Ordering chicks from a hatchery or getting them from another farm or local store, it's a risk just because they could be bringing in avian influenza, unfortunately. That's something to consider, and if you're able to have a closed flock, that would be ideal during these times. However, if you're just getting started with chickens and you want to start your first flock, just do your best to find a chicken breeder who has a flock that has been recently tested for avian influenza. So at least you know they've recently all tested negative for avian influenza and potentially other diseases that are checked for. So don't be afraid to ask at your local store or at the hatchery or local farm if they've done the testing, if they've had recent testing, what those results are, just so that way you can start with a flock that's healthy, that comes from a healthy flock. Another way to keep wild birds away from your enclosure is by using deterrence. What I like to use is fake owls. So I have fake owls positioned so that they are over the chicken runs to deter wild birds from wanting to fly over this area. It really seems to work because a lot of the wild birds that I see are on the outskirts of my property away from these fake owls, and so I have yet to see a wild bird fly over this area where I have the owl decoys. So that's something that you could consider trying. I'll leave a link to the ones that I use down in the description below. When you restrict your birds to a smaller area to protect them, one thing not to neglect is enrichment, because if they're used to free ranging, they're used to a lot of stimulation being out free ranging, and when you switch them to a smaller area, confined area, they are going to get bored. So there's a lot of different things that you can do for your chickens for enrichment. I'll be adding in different playground items in here to also enrich their surroundings, but I just want to do a little bit at a time so it's not too overwhelming with too much stimulus. And I'll be sure to keep you updated as I add new things so that you can see what we're doing. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below and I'll get back to you and answer your question to the best of my ability. If you'd like to check out some more videos, we have lots of videos on chicken care, chick care, raising goats, and gardening.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Do you want to farm? A wicked awesome farm? Watch this channel to learn what to do. We love to farm and we'll show you. Yeah.